Hello, I'm Locke, Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where I'm very pleased to have on the show for the very first time our new United States Congressman for District 6, Garret Graves. Garrett's going to talk to us about, frankly, what a day in the life is like being a United States Congressman. He's going to tell us the process of making legislation, and he's also going to talk to us about the big issues in the state of Louisiana. It's economy, jobs, and energy. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Congressman Garret Graves. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're going to talk about the law and you and why it should matter to you what a law is. You know, in America, in our cities, in our states, in our federal governments, they all pass thousands, hundreds of thousands of laws, regulations every single year, and they either directly or indirectly affect you. That's why you need to know what a law is. It's an exercise of power over people, places, and things. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on Legal Lines today, where my special guest is our United States Congressman for District 6, Garret Graves. Garret, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.
This is really a continuation of a show that we just taped, and let's just pick up where we were, Garret. We were talking about all the international issues that our country faces, and we've discussed kind of all the turmoil in the Middle East and in the Russian areas. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about the national issues, because frankly, they're just as big, if not more important, to folks here in America, because they're suffering. So what do we do, first of all, about the economy?
Look, I mean, it's the national issues, the Louisiana issues, is really why I ran. Here we are approaching $18 trillion in national debt, something that future generations are going to be absolutely burdened with.
20 trillion when President Obama leaves office.
Yeah. I mean, just to see this extraordinary debt, it comes out to approaching $70,000 per American right now, man, woman, child, and every child born in this country today is going to end up paying about $1.5 million over their lifetime to pay for that debt that they didn't benefit.
That's right. It's like the credit card was taken out in their name, the government went and spent the money and then said, here's your card, pay it over the rest of your life.
But $18 trillion we're approaching today, and just an extraordinary number. We're seeing all sorts of new regulations coming out that are really challenging America's economy, but specifically, I think a lot of those having a disproportionate impact on Louisiana and Louisiana's economy.
Agreed.
And some of the real strategic resources we have and advantages we have in this state are going to be challenged moving forward if these proposed regulations are allowed to stand.
And of course, we're talking about energy. Our oil and chemicals and gas production here is being, in a lot of ways, stifled by the federal government. So what do we do about it?
Well, look, the role of Congress is to legislate, and what we've seen increasingly out of this White House is effectively legislating through regulation, proposing regulations that I believe in many cases go outside the confines of the bounds of the law. Everything from expanding a definition of waters of the U.S., which is going to potentially declare all these lands around South Louisiana as
subject
wetlands.
to EPA.
Yeah, subject to EPA, Corps of Engineers, ozone standards, which purportedly the Yellowstone National Park can't comply with an ozone standard being floated out there today by the EPA, yet here you have the second top petrochemical industry in the nation here in Louisiana, and of course it's going to challenge us. Some of the new regulations on fracking, the new regulations on offshore energy production, all of them challenging our economy. And Locke, as you know, Louisiana has nearly $100 billion in economic development projects on the horizon. We are having a manufacturing renaissance right here in Louisiana.
Unbelievable what has happened over the last 8 years.
And all of these proposed regulations are going to threaten that success, that future. If they're allowed to be finalized.
Well, and it's having such a huge impact on not just the economy of Louisiana, but the economy of the entire nation, because the government, through its taxation policies and its regulation, is sucking money out of the private world, us, the people and small businesses. And instead they get our money and then they go spend it inefficiently and ineffectively. So how do we stop this?
Well, what we've got to do is we've got to get together as Congress and the public. We've got to prevent these regulations from becoming final. We've passed legislation out of the House of Representatives that in some cases would require congressional approval for certain regulatory approaches before they can be finalized. we're going to have to start ensuring that any law that's passed out of Congress, any bill that's passed out of Congress, has very tight confines and prevents the president from exercising any authority, as we've seen under this administration. And importantly, I think that the 2016 elections are critical. We've got to get a more business-minded president in this office and someone who has experience in the private sector to run this country, because of the direction we're going in right now. All we're going to do is we're going to end up sending off jobs to Mexico. We're going to send off jobs to Brazil, to India,
Yep.
China, and all these other countries that don't have these absurd environmental and other restrictions in place that are going to threaten our employment opportunities and future growth here in Louisiana.
Let's remind folks the way our system of government works. We've got the House, which is one half of Congress, and you have the Senate. They legislate, they write the laws. Then you have the President of the United States and all his agencies and departments who are supposed to implement the laws that Congress passes. And they do that via rules and regulations. What you said is some of his agencies now are in essence using rules and regulations to do what only Congress is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And as a result, our economy and the people are suffering. So how do we change this? The election is 2 years away. What do we do in the meantime?
Well, look, in the meantime, number one, we unfortunately have Congress has actually filed lawsuits going to the judicial branch. Balance of
And
powers.
that's the third branch.
That's right. And so as we've seen through a different court case, you've seen that in Texas there was a judge that actually stopped some of the president's amnesty actions pertaining to immigration. Congress, again, has filed other lawsuits that challenge the president's authority to prevent him from moving forward. You've seen challenges to Obamacare through this King versus Burwell case, some of the subsidies. A decision will be made in June. And so I think what's going to happen is you're going to, number one, be chipping away at some of the president's agenda through the court system. And number two, on those areas where we can develop a supermajority in Congress. Keep in mind, we have a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate, but we don't have a veto-proof margin.
Which would be 60.
It would, in the Senate, you'd need over 60 votes in the Senate to be able to override a veto. We don't have those votes there right now. So we're going to have to identify those discrete issues where you have a supermajority in Congress and can overturn the vetoes. And I do think that there's some things out there, including, as you and I have discussed in the past, some of the Israel and Iran issues that I think you have a very different position in Congress than you have within the White House.
It's interesting. The president, via his rules and regulation, is legislating, and we're forced to rely on the judiciary, the third branch of our government, to decide, and yet it takes years usually to get the issue resolved by 9 folks who aren't elected and appointed by life by whatever sitting president appoints them. I understand you're kind of working on some possible legislation to maybe change that.
We are, and so 2 things. One is, in some cases, as you know, you normally do an annual appropriations bill. So in some cases, we've been successful in putting language on an appropriations bill that would put a 1-year restriction on the use of funds to prevent the president from carrying out certain actions. But secondly, we are working with a coalition right now on legislation that would require an expedited judicial review whenever Congress objects to something that the administration is doing. And so instead of going through this multi-year process, going through the district, the appellate, and the Supreme level, where you would have an expedited review, very quick judicial review for certain actions when Congress objects to an administrative action, therefore putting a better check and balance in place among Congress and the judicial branch.
Well, it certainly makes sense, because in Congress you got, 435 representatives and 100 senators representing the 313 million folks, and yet they're treated as the same as Blow Joe who files a lawsuit here. I mean, it makes no sense. That seems very wise. Also, you talked about the legislation being very specific, and there not being ambiguity, and being very limited in any delegation of power that the president has. How do we do that specifically?
Well, look, in previous laws that have been written, in many cases, the law will say that the secretary of whichever agency may carry out actions to authorize this, or to carry forward this project, or to implement this program. And now, seeing the extraordinary discretion that this administration is attempting to to put into place, we're going to have to be much more prescriptive in the language to ensure that the president can't, under any interpretation, carry out actions outside the confines of the law.
And so he can't interpret the word the way he wants to if it's not ambiguous.
Strict congressional intent.
We'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke, Meredith with Legal Lines. My guest, our United States Congressman Garret Graves. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're going to talk about you and the law. You know, a law is nothing but an exercise of power over you, people, places, or things. But where does that power come from? Where does the government get that power? And how is that power exercised? And do you play a role at all? That's what you need to know. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, very pleased to have back on the show our United States Congressman for District 6, Garret Graves. Let's dive right back in, Garret. Shifting gears from what we were discussing about kind of the division of power and how it seems to be being usurped, the power of Congress usurped by the president. Let's talk about jobs, because unemployment is at historical highs. Folks receiving unemployment benefits are at historical highs. Folks working part-time jobs, because that's all they can find, are at historical highs. What do we do?
You know, Locke, when you look back historically, the United States became the greatest, the most powerful country in the world because we incentivized hard work. If you worked hard, you could succeed, whatever your definition of success was. And now you're seeing this de-incentivizing of that hard work, where studies have shown that you can make up to $25 an hour by not ever working, just taking advantage of various social welfare programs. Whether it's unemployment, you can look across the board. We subsidize transit, we subsidize healthcare, education, we subsidize food programs. What we need to do is we've got to begin incentivizing the type of behavior that you want to occur, people to transition into the workforce, people to become contributing members of society and paying taxes. And we have increasingly de-incentivized that and encouraged people to stay home, which is why you've seen this growth in the cost of these social welfare programs. I think what we need to do is we need to take a cross-section of all the subsidies that we're providing to address, kind of the war on poverty, which we're losing right now.
Yeah, no, it's gotten worse.
The amount of money we're spending has gone through the roof. The number of people dependent upon government programs now is at record levels. So, but looking at them across the board, which one of those are working? I'm not saying we just come in and cut everything and kick everybody out on the street. What I'm saying is we've got to look and decide which of these programs are actually working and transitioning people into the workforce. That's where the money needs to be spent. In the programs that are working, we need to take the dollars out of these programs that are not working, invest them where they are, and ultimately save extraordinary dollars and have a more productive country, more productive workforce.
Well, and I'm worried too that we have a whole underground kind of black market economy where folks are getting all those benefits and then they're actually working for cash somewhere, not reporting it, getting tax credits and all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting double whammied. We're not getting the tax revenue that could be generated, and we're not getting a productive society, and we're creating folks that are not really capable of caring for themselves, their family, their children. And it's a recipe that just seems like it's a freight train heading for a disaster. I mean, if this keeps happening, we're going to implode sooner or later.
We are, and actually it's interesting you say that about the underground economy or kind of the black market economy. Some of the big advocates of the fair tax are looking at replacing the income tax with a sales tax. Have indicated, or advocated that their tax would make sense, or their tax approach would make sense, because you'd be able to begin to capture some of that underground economy.
You don't have to trust them to say how much they made. Yeah. They're spending the money, and you receive your tax revenue that way. Yeah.
But look, is this country on the wrong track? I believe that it is. I believe that we've deviated from some of the successful strategies that made us the greatest country, but I believe that we can pivot back. But I'll say again, I really think that this 2016 presidential election is going to be critical.
Well, let's talk about the tax scenario, because I know taxes, we've discussed, have gone up to a historical all-time high in America. They've never raised as much in taxes as they did this past year. And yet President Obama submits a budget that's what, $4 trillion?
It is $500 billion out of balance in 2016 alone, despite raising over $2 trillion in taxes and fees over the next 10 years. The Republicans in charge of the House, we submitted a budget. We had a budget amendment that was going to bring our budget to balance in 6 years and then begin paying off the debt. Ultimately, we couldn't get the votes for that one, but we did pass a bill that will balance within 10 years and begin addressing some of the extraordinary debt by then.
And the reason that's so important, folks need to understand that right now our Federal Reserve Bank, which is really the central bank of America, is artificially keeping interest rates down low. Historically, the average has been around 5% that the government has to pay on that $18 trillion in debt that we already have. That's going to keep going up. If we go from 0 or 1% to 5%, we're cooked.
Yeah.
It'll never get paid back.
No, there are scenarios where all discretionary spending could be paying just the interest on the debt in the future if we don't very quickly curb this ridiculous spending that we're doing right now. But Doc, the thing is when you look across government, I mean, some of the programs that are out there right now that we're spending money on that simply aren't providing a return on investment. And you and I have discussed in the past some of the inefficiencies of the Corps of Engineers and EPA and FEMA and others. And I mean, it is amazing the amount of money that is wasted when you have the financial crisis that I think we have here in this country, and to allow those types of expenditures to continue, that type of behavior to continue, is just absurd.
Well, they're not accountable. The bottom line is the behavior of the agencies, and some, not all employees obviously, and departments would not and could not exist in the private world, because there are consequences to not getting the job done efficiently and effectively. There's no accountability, and that's why I guess it happens that way. Let's shift gears. Border security. We are being invaded by my heart bleeds for these children coming across and the families who are destitute and being subjected to horrible violence. But we're not really capable of taking all these tens and hundreds of thousands of folks into our state, much less the entire United States. What do we do?
The people are coming across the border. You have the president out there on TV talking about how we're going to provide amnesty that incentivizes people to come here, where they're going to get health care and education and food and other government programs that we're paying for. Millions, over 10 million illegal aliens here today. You have millions that are trying to legally immigrate here to the United States, staying back in their home countries, filling out the paperwork,
doing it right,
going through the legal process. Why in the world would you take the people, over 10 million people that are here illegally, and potentially put them on a path to citizenship that is in front of those that have stayed back in their own country and gone through the legal process? It is the wrong incentive to put in place to reward those who have broken the law knowingly and willingly. We need to do a combination of things. Number one is, in some cases, we need to have a fence, and that's not going to be feasible, and it's not going to be cost effective in all sectors of our southern border. But we've got to build a fence in some areas. We're going to have to use electronic and other types of surveillance technologies.
They call it the virtual fence.
Exactly. And you're going to have multiple layers of technologies there to protect our southern border. But Locke, look, we have the best military in the world. You're going to tell me that we don't have, as I've heard the president and others say, we can't protect our southern border. Does that mean that a foreign military can come charging into our southern border? Of course it doesn't. We have the capabilities to stop people from coming into this country. We've absolutely got to do it. They're taking away jobs from Americans. They're costing our economy, and we need to go through. We also need to go through legal reform of the immigration system. So I think it's a three-pronged process. You got to secure the border. I think you need to send people back that have knowingly and willingly come here illegally, and I think that we need to reform the legal immigration process.
Well, and there's one other issue in there that we've discussed also, and that is we are sitting ducks by allowing folks who we know nothing about and aren't interviewing, that are coming across, but because we don't secure that border. All these people who hate us in the Middle East, they're coming over to South America, and they're coming up, or they're paying off drug cartel folks in Mexico, and they're bringing them into our country. They're here. Mm-hmm. So there is a huge security risk here in that regard. Agreed?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, the president's talking about amnesty. You're incentivizing people to come here. These same transnational organizations that do drugs and illegally bring aliens, those are the guys who are making money off the president's statements.
And so we're sitting ducks, and we need to do something about it.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke, Meredith with Legal Lines. And my very special guest, United States Congressman Garret Graves. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where we're talking about the law and you. The law is nothing but an exercise of power by a government over you. But because our framers in our Constitution knew that power could be abused and corrupting, they chopped up power between the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary, and you. So join us on the next Legal Lines, where knowledge is power. Welcome back to Legal Lines. Again, I'm very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman Garret Graves. Let's dive back in. So January 3 of 15, you became the Congressman for 763,000 Louisianians. Tell me what a day in the life is playing that role.
Sure. Normally wake up about 5 in the morning. I go run or go exercise, shower, get cleaned up, and usually we start around 7 o'clock or 7:30. Wow. And we usually do some type of internal meeting first thing in the morning, and then just go on to different meetings. And we have different caucuses that we participate in, that we meet together. In some cases, we meet as Republican members of Congress, and then we usually go into committee meetings. And committee meetings usually happen in the morning. We'll have hearings or markups, and then usually you start rolling into constituent meetings. And I mean, it is amazing the dozens of constituents that will be in town every single day.
Really?
That we meet with. So our life is scheduled in 30-minute blocks, literally all day long. You have votes that are kind of populated throughout the day. They're largely unscheduled, so you can be in the middle of a meeting, they call a vote.
Really?
And run over
no
to the.
Notice at all.
Well,
wow.
they try and project it, but it's not as structured in the House as it is in the Senate. It's a little bit more difficult to predict. And so you go run over, and of course it disrupts your schedule every time it happens. And so but again, 30-minute blocks, and then normally starting around 6 o'clock or 6:30. A lot of the groups and associations that the constituents are in town for, they'll have receptions in our building, and so
you got to go hang out with
and
folks.
So you go meet the larger groups, and it may be folks who are interested in rivers and maritime issues. It may be chiropractors or other interest groups that are in town, constituent groups that are in town from the state, and so go to those events and spend time with them there, and usually come back to the office sometime after those, maybe 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And believe it or not, we usually have 2 or 3 other people in the office, and we kind of go through all the things we committed to do through the day, and then we plan the next day, and usually get back home. Earliest usually get home is about 11 o'clock. Sometimes I sleep on the office in the couch. And usually again, sometimes between 11 and midnight, and then start it all over again the next
Lord
morning.
Almighty. You know, it's interesting. We've talked about it before, that you've had experience in the legislative branch and in the executive branch. So you kind of bring this unique perspective of how, hopefully, to make government work better.
And the private sector, seeing it really from all three.
Exactly. And so, explain to folks how a decision is made, because as I understand it, you got tons of people there, 435 people. They all want to have a say. They all want to do something, make something happy for their folks. But it would shut the whole system down. So y'all have organized a system of committees and subcommittees. Explain that to folks.
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point. The House of Representatives having 435 members, you can imagine if every bill that came to the floor, everyone could offer as many amendments as they want, you would very quickly become even more dysfunctional than it is today. Thousands of amendments and bills wouldn't really move forward. So they've split up all the jurisdictions based on committee assignments, and we're on the Transportation Committee, which has jurisdiction over traditional transportation means like highways and airports and rails, rivers, levees, pipelines.
Obviously very important to us in Louisiana.
Wetlands, yeah, absolutely. Disasters, FEMA is actually under that jurisdiction as well. And then the House Natural Resources Committee, which is upstream energy production, fisheries, hunting, public lands.
Very important stuff to
a lot of our
Louisiana.
environment, natural resource issues, things that are
Glad
very
you're on
important.
those committees.
Very important to South Louisiana. And so usually what happens is bills that are introduced, they're referred to the subcommittee or the full committee that has that jurisdiction. We consider it, we have hearings on it, we vote on it, bring in experts, and then it is passed to the full committee, then to the House floor. But generally, a bill in the House of Representatives, once it's discharged from a committee, you don't see a whole lot of change to the bill on the House floor, because they usually prevent amendments from being offered on the House floor. It's largely a baked piece of legislation by the time it gets there. So the committee assignments, the committee work is
That's supposed to
usually
flush all
very
the stuff
critical.
out. Okay, so kind of just to summarize it in my head, in the committees or subcommittees, folks who are supposed to be experts or have interests or concerns about the particular legislation come in and educate you guys via testimony.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Or they meet with y'all outside of the hearing, I guess.
Use a combination
if
of the
they
two.
want to. They educate you, try and provide you materials. You get educated on it. Then you cast a vote there. And if a majority of the committee members agree that this should be a bill, then it's sent up to the main committee?
From a subcommittee to full committee to the House.
Okay. And when it goes to the House, I think we discussed too that when it's all said and done, the leadership, in this case in the House it would be Representative Boner, ultimately decides whether or not it's going to make it to the House for a vote or not. Is that right?
They do have leadership meetings, and the Speaker and the Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise from Louisiana,
right, yeah.
They're usually all involved, and usually they're the ones who set the schedule for the week and determines which bills will be heard before the full House.
Am I correct in also understanding there are different committees that may have concurrent jurisdiction over legislation? In other words, one might be concerned about rivers and the other one might be concerned about the Gulf, and since it deals with both, they want to vote, and that can create issues.
It can, and it actually is a really important lesson learned back from staff days, is when you write legislation, trying to keep it within the jurisdiction of a single committee usually is a better approach, because when you get multiple referrals, I've seen a bill referred to 5 different committees, and you talk about a quagmire and a bill that's going to be clogged up in the system for a long period of time. That's the way to do it.
So the key is what we were talking about as far as legislation, bills, law being sent to the president, and that is be very specific on the issue, like a laser beam with very specific language.
Usually that's the way you can get consensus, and it makes it easier getting through the committee referral process.
Now explain how because folks don't realize what a sacrifice you folks make. I'm serious. It's remarkable what you do, because you're trying to come back. How many times do you meet in Congress in D.C. a month?
In general, we're in session Monday through Thursday, so we either fly up Sunday night or first thing Monday morning. That's like first thing, usually the 6 a.m. flight. And then we either finish voting on Thursday evening, in which case we'll take a Thursday evening flight back, or in some cases Friday morning. And a lot of people say, oh, look, you're out of session, so you're not working. But the reality is, just like this week where we're out of session, we are doing meetings every single day we're here. So I will say that generally we work, and certainly every member of Congress is different, but we work 7 days a week. We go to have meetings, do church services on Sundays even, and getting out and meeting constituents and doing different dialogues and town halls and others with them. So we do work 7 days a week, but it just depends on the member and how their style, I guess.
And with that kind of schedule, you have to run every 2 years. That's an amazing task.
It really is.
It takes a special heart and drive, seriously.
Well, I just from previous jobs, someone who has a passion for their job, you see a very different type of work output from them versus people that are there for the paycheck. I love South Louisiana. I think that we were dealt an incredible hand by God in regard to the natural resources and all the great advantages that we have here, the great people we have here. And I really want to see our future be as bright as our past, and brighter than our past. We have 3 young kids, and so my wife and I try and incorporate them into things as much as we can, particularly on the weekends, to make sure that we're getting good family time as well. But you know what? They're in it too. They're believers. They understand that this is about their future, and so it is a family ordeal in many cases.
So what do you see? We've only got about a minute. What do you see as the kind of the issues that you're focused on right now that you really want something to happen?
Look, the things that we're focused on are things that are really important in Louisiana's economy. Things like the energy industry, the petrochemical, the transportation issues, trying to fix the crazy traffic we have here in the capital region, focusing on flood protection, and focusing on really on the river and maritime things that drive our economy.
Fantastic. Garret, thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
This is Locke, Meredith Legal Lines. My very special guest, our United States Congressman Garret Graves. Thanks for being with us.